Hi. On the April 5th, 2019, I sent this to Brian Jenkins. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. I want Brian to take a look at it and tell me what he thinks. And if it's okay, I will then finish the chapter and have Carol edit for grammar and format to make sure it's consistent with APA and also UWA requirements. Here's what I sent, and let's review it quickly. There you can see it's April 5th, and today is April 7th. So this was Friday, and today is Sunday, and I call this an economic review of water pricing by the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. And I start off by saying this is an economic study, and that's exactly what it is. It's no more than an economic study, and it's no less. And I discuss resources, scarce resources in a world of unlimited wants. And then I take some time to talk about what I see as economics. And it start off, economic theory is positive or non-normative. And simply by that I mean it may be normative in certain populations for people to smoke. It just may be that they smoke. That's a normal behavior. Other populations, smoking may be frowned on. But health requirements exist for both. And that's the same with economics. Economic analysis can look at a control economy, a laissez-faire economy, microeconomics, so-called microeconomics, so-called macroeconomics. And I know there was a big effort when I was a young man taking economics in graduate school. For my master's, that was an artificial dichotomy. And so here is economics can speculate with assumptions of A, then B type outcomes. This is all subject to probability and holding some variables constant. Ceteris paribus, I believe, was the economists versus economics may make forecasts. And in chapters 4 and 5 of this tome, I do make econometric analysis, and I do make forecasts. And that is done trying as hard as possible to remain true to the precepts of orthodox economic analysis. And then I go on to say there's a valid core of economic analysis is applicable to all economic systems. That's what I mentioned above. You know, it goes from the competitive grocery store in Chinatown that must compete with other grocery stores to large monopolies like the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, which is a closed monopoly, and competition is forbidden. But the economic theory is still applicable to both type systems and everything in between and before and after. And then I discussed the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. It's a self-governing local government agency in the state of California. Many of the political jurisdictions in California have their own utility system for water, wastewater, garbage, and some even for power. The PUC SFPUC sets its own water rates for its 2.6 million customers, and it's got two sets of customers: wholesale customers, that's the 28 some regional customers that are under the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, a state agency with all the powers of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and we provide them, or the SFPUC provides them, with wholesale water. It also provides both wholesale and retail water to the city and county of San Francisco. It takes the wholesale water at the city gate and then sells it into 3 different customer categories: single-family dwelling, multi-family dwellings, and commercial customers. And the ratepayer charges are allocated based on a system which is called the revenue requirements approach to rate making. The revenue requirements approach to rate making simply says that a utility will forecast what its costs will be into the future. And there's 2 basic costs in the SFPUC world: debt service, which is increasingly becoming more of the costs that must be passed on to the ratepayers, and operation and maintenance. Until 2007, the SFPUC used single pricing for single-family dwellings and multi-family dwellings, and then in 2007 it went to tier pricing, ascending tier pricing. In other words, a certain amount of money at a lower cost, then a step up, and then any additional water at a higher cost. That's called ascending tier pricing because it goes up. Commercial customers are charged a single rate still. In 2009, multi-family dwellings, and that's like large apartment complexes, also were placed on the ascending tier pricing regime. The cost of service approach in the U.S. and California, and it's in the thesis I write it, but it's basically based on early history where it was thought that the robber barons and people like that were gouging the public with these capital-intensive facilities such as the SFPUC, big, massive water companies, and therefore they looked to a system that would eliminate that, and they came up with the revenue requirements approach, and revenues could be set equal to reasonable costs required to run the water system. And I discussed that in here. And also we talk about the reasonableness doctrine. That just simply means you can't put into the rate base cost like a trip to Paris for the management on a sightseeing trip. That wouldn't be a reasonable cost. There's lots of questions as what is reasonable right now. I have a lot of questions as to how they do their debt service, and I'll come to that. But I think that needs to be questioned. And then I talk about the capital intensiveness of these type operations, and this is all in the document. And then I talk about self-regulating. Well, in California, there's self-regulating municipal utilities, and there's investor-owned utilities, which are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. And the California Public Utilities Commission has a quasi-legal approach, and they also have a division of ratepayer advocates to protect the ratepayers. And it's a very non-discretionary system. It goes from step to step to step. There is nothing like that I can discern in what happens at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. It reminds me a little bit of a gong show. They hold a hearing, and the hearing gives people between 2 to 3 minutes to speak, and then the bell rings and they've got to get off the podium and go, and the next person comes along, and it seems to me that staff, in all their lack of wisdom or wisdom, whatever we may be, have already decided what will happen. And I've had lots of concerns about that. especially what they put into the rates as debt service. Anyway, is the well, and then because you have a need in a large utility to do a good job, to provide a near ad infinitum flow of water and wastewater, and if you're in the garbage business, garbage services to your customers, and it has to be continuous and efficient, and that's what these people are vested to do. San Francisco receives about 85% of its water from the Tuolumne River. And the Tuolumne River is a river that rises in the High Sierra over 8,000 feet and flows to the ocean through a network of the Bay Area riverine system. In 1906, the SFPUC was building facilities in the Hetch Hetchy Valley to capture this water, but there was such an outcry by the public throughout the United States, led by John Muir and people like that stopped this. So I think it was like in March, they said, okay, we're not going to dam any of the water in the Tuolumne River in the Hetch Hetchy Valley, and the facility, the plan was shut down. Then, of course, we all know what happened in April 1906. Earthquake and subsequent fires wiped out the city of San Francisco. And one of the reasons the fires spread was that, and that was the major cause of most of the destruction, was that there was no water to put the fires out. It was an inadequate water supply. So in 1913, the Raker Act was passed by local congressmen, and this allowed the San Francisco to be given the granteeship on the Tuolumne River to extract water from to dam and extract water from the Tuolumne River under certain circumstances, and these circumstances were quite strict. They measured the water at a place called LaGrange, and if the flows were, I think it's 2,250 cubic feet per second, they couldn't take any water out of the river, and also they couldn't take any water out of the river until the irrigation districts, that's Modesto and Turlock, was satisfied. And then from April 15th for the next 60 days, they couldn't take any water out of the river until the flows reached 4,000 cubic feet per second. And again, the same condition, only if the irrigation districts agreed. Later on, Turlock and Modesto built this massive dam, New Don Pedro Dam, which is the largest on the Tuolumne River. I think it's about 550,000 cubic feet of acre feet of water, and San Francisco paid for half of it. But San Francisco has no right to extract water from this system, from this dam, because it's not connected to the Hetch Hetchy system. But there's a gentleman's agreement, or a gentleman and ladies agreement, that they can store water in there from their dams higher in the Sierra, and then they can transfer that to the irrigation districts, and in return they can take water out that normally would be taken out by the irrigation districts. It's quite complex, it's quite innovative, and it's one of the very Cosian exchanges that I think really needs a lot of investigation and as to how successful it's been. But it has been a very it seems to work. But the problem is that there is just no agreement on paper. And so I then came along and I said, well, how am I going to analyze all this? And it became clear to me that to analyze how effective the SFPUC has been in their stewardship is the current pricing system used by the SFPUC efficient? Well, that pricing system is both wholesale and retail. And are the current laws regulating local government utilities in San Francisco and California consistent with efficient pricing? And so to get a grip on this, I discuss what a price is. It's basically an exchange ratio, and most of us see it as an exchange ratio that's been monetarized. And I discuss that in details. I mean, it could be dollars, euros, pounds, yen, etc. And then we cannot, once you monetize something, you also bring another actor into the equation, because our money supply is controlled by the Federal Reserve System, and it's their policies that keep the money supply consistent. In other words, it's not too much inflation. And Armin Alshin had a very sage comment about this. I remember that he said that money is that commodity which, entering into a matrix of exchanges, has the least variance in exchange. But there has been inflation, and this raises another problem which might be worthwhile discussing right now. The Hetch-Hetchy system, as run by the SFPUC, charges its wholesale customers based upon the O&M that they use for the system. It's allocated basically 1/3 to San Francisco and 2/3 to the Bay Area Water Users Association, which was the predecessor to the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, created in 2002 by state legislation. So they use a thing how do they evaluate debt? Well, these are capital intensive entities, water utilities. So what they did back in those days, they used the rate base approach. And the rate base is simply total investment minus accumulated depreciation, plus a small amount for current work in progress or capital being used now for O&M type things. And they multiply that by the weighted average cost of capital, and that gives the allowed rate of return on investment. Normally, if it's debt is 4%, equity is 4%, then the average is 4%, and it's a simple calculation like that. And that approach was called the utility approach. Then in 2009, they passed a new agreement between the Peninsula customers, which superseded the 1984 agreement, Master Water Agreement of 1984, and the 2009 Master Water Agreement. They went to what they call the cash approach. Now, the cash approach is beguiling. They can issue debt, and they said this themselves in 2012, the SFPUC. The cash approach allows us to issue debt and then unhook it from why we issued the debt. In other words, they just play money games. And this seems very contrary to a really strong piece of legislation that was passed in 1996 called Proposition 218, which says you can only charge current customers for current costs. So if they're switching debt around between different generations or doing intergenerational transfers with the debt, this doesn't seem like that they're in agreement with Proposition 218, and I think it's a vulnerability. And then we talk about pricing efficiency, and pricing efficiency is you get down to looking at the Pareto optimality concept, that when you're on the contract curve, one person makes a gain, someone else loses. Well, that's the point of maximum of optimizing productive and consumptive trade-offs. And so what is this? What is a practical approach to pricing efficiency? And that's what I discuss in later parts of this essay. And and then I talk about this here, and the appendix, what I'm going to put in there. And I want to go into this diagram. It's funny. The PUC currently uses two types of pricing. And they're very similar. They use discriminatory pricing, and they use multi-part pricing. And one of the great things that has beguiled accountants forever is how to allocate costs for a sheep between mutton and wool, which produces both, or lamb and wool. And one example is just simply, if you look at they've got two different demands. I mean, there's a different demand for wool, and there's a different demand for mutton, but the costs are common. They call this a common cost, joint products. It can be more than joint products, and these are two different segmented markets, and they have different demand functions. And this could be equivalent to, this could be the PUC, and this could be non-commercial water use. That would be single-family dwellings and multi-family dwellings, and this could be commercial. So what they do is that you sum up the marginal revenues of these sub-markets, and where the total marginal revenues cross the marginal cost function for the firm, because it's one firm producing the same thing but selling in two different markets, and that's where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And then you just draw a line out till you hit the first, and you come up with the price in this market, and then you go up to the next market and come up, and this is where you maximize profits. And I use the word profits advisedly. To me, profit is an unexpected increase in wealth. This is probably more in the world of Bill Allen, be wealth maximizations. And then I go through then I put all their different pricing mechanisms together, and I show how we can put them on one graph. This is a normal price searchers or price seekers demand curve. They don't know where, they're looking to see what's the best price from. And if they can charge different prices, like for the first price, maybe you charge $5 for the first gallon of water, or unit of water rather, the next unit $4.50. They're metering people's demand, and that type of multi-part pricing is a way to eliminate consumer surplus. And then if they're able to do that successfully, the marginal revenue curve just swings up and becomes the average revenue curve or the demand curve. Or they can do other pricing. They can do the wealth maximizing price, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and that produces this type of relation, P1, X1, and this quantity is produced. And you can see here that the consumer surplus, which is the area from under the demand curve up to the price, is very small. But if you go down here to where they set price equal to marginal cost, which is marginal cost being the supply curve, you can see that the consumer surplus is much bigger, P3, Z, and P. So that would be like a normal market solution. And then if they try to maximize revenues, they price at the point B here on this curve, and B and at price 2, because a linear demand curve has a marginal revenue that's positive up to the midpoint on the curve, and then after that it's negative. So at point B, revenues are maximized. This is just a summary of what I'm trying to put together to go forward for the rest of the section. I know that this is a bit disorganized, but if you read this paper, you should get a feel for what I'm trying to do. It's very important to me in doing this that I use the tools of orthodox economic analysis, that this is an economic study. This is not a special study for water utilities. Water is just a commodity like any other commodity when it comes to economic analysis. And so that'll do for now.